The ruins of Celestia Prime stretched endlessly beneath the perpetual crimson sky, a monument to humanity's greatest achievement and its most devastating failure. Captain Louise Vega pressed herself against the twisted metal of what had once been the Grand Admiralty building, her breathing shallow as she watched the hunting patrols sweep through the skeletal remains of the capital city. The devourers moved like liquid shadow, their forms shifting between states of matter as they searched for survivors. Louise could hear their chittering communication echoing off the broken walls, a sound that had haunted her dreams for the past 3 years since the fall of the intergalactic empire. Her comm unit vibrated against her wrist with a coded message. Extraction point Alpha 7. 15 minutes. Louise closed her eyes, remembering when this same street had been filled with beings from 1,000 worlds, their hover vehicles creating rivers of light between the towering spires. The Imperial Navy had been the pride of the galaxy, its ships protecting trade routes that spanned 37 star systems. Now, scattered remnants of that once mighty force huddled in hidden bunkers, planning a counterattack that seemed increasingly impossible. A shadow passed overhead, one of the Devourer scout ships, its hull seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Louise waited until it disappeared beyond the ruined skyline before breaking cover, her military-grade stealth suit adapting to match the debris around her. The extraction point was a maintenance tunnel that led to the old subway system, now serving as one of many passages in the underground network that kept the resistance alive. Louise dropped through the concealed entrance, her boots landing silently on the metal grating below. "About time," whispered Marcus Chin, her longtime partner in the aerospace forces. The Asian man's usually neat appearance had grown rough around the edges, his uniform patched and repatched. "Command's been waiting for your reconnaissance report." They moved through the tunnels with practiced efficiency, following a route that changed daily to avoid detection. The Resistance had learned hard lessons about the Devourer's ability to track patterns and exploit weaknesses. Every safe house, every meeting point, every supply cache was considered compromised after a single use. The command center occupied a section of the old Imperial archives, its massive data storage facilities now repurposed to house the scattered leadership of the former empire. General Sarah Blackwood looked up from a holographic display as Louise entered, her weathered face betraying none of the exhaustion that Louise knew they all felt. "Report," Blackwood said without preamble. Louise activated her tactical display, showing the skin data she'd gathered during her reconnaissance. "The Devourer presence in Sector 7 has tripled. They're not just hunting survivors anymore, they're excavating something from the ruins of the Research Institute." Admiral Torres, the highest-ranking surviving naval officer, leaned forward. "Any idea what they're looking for?" "That's the interesting part," Louise continued, manipulating the display to show thermal readings. "The excavation site is directly above the sealed vault where Dr. Reeves was working on Project Omega before the invasion." A collective silence fell over the command staff. Project Omega had been the Empire's most classified military research program, known only to a handful of senior officials. If the Devourers were seeking it out specifically, it meant they had intelligence about Imperial weapons development that should have been impossible for them to obtain. "We always suspected there was a leak," General Blackwood said quietly. "Someone gave them the locations of our most critical facilities. That's the only way they could have crippled our defenses so quickly." Louise nodded grimly. The invasion had been swift and devastating, with Devourer forces striking simultaneously at every major Imperial installation. Within 72 hours, the Navy's command structure had been shattered, leaving individual ship commanders to fight desperate holding actions before being overwhelmed. "What exactly was Dr. Reeves working on?" asked Commander Walsh, the Resistance's intelligence chief. Admiral Torres hesitated before answering. "A theoretical weapons system based on captured alien technology. The working name was Void Cannon, a device capable of tearing holes in space-time itself." Louise felt a chill run down her spine. She'd heard rumors about the project, whispers that the Empire had been reverse engineering technology from previous alien encounters. But if such a weapon existed, why hadn't it been used against the Devourers? "The project was never completed," Torres continued. Dr. Reeves claimed he needed more time to understand the underlying principles. The prototype was sealed in the vault when the invasion began. And now the devourers are trying to dig it up, Louise said, pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Which means they know something about its capabilities that we don't. General Blackwood stood and walked to the display, studying the thermal readings with a tactical eye. Or they're afraid of what we might do with it. If we could get our hands on those research files. The vault is heavily defended, Louise interrupted. The devourers have established a perimeter that extends 3 kilometers in every direction. Getting inside would be a suicide mission. Not necessarily, Commander Walsh said, pulling up a new set of schematics. We've been monitoring their patrol patterns for weeks. There's a maintenance shaft that runs underneath the Research Institute, part of the old geothermal system. It was designed to be undetectable from above. Louise studied the route, calculating distances and timing. It's possible, but I'd need a team. Negative, General Blackwood said firmly. This is a solo mission. We can't risk losing multiple operatives if something goes wrong. Louise wanted to argue, but she understood the logic. The resistance was down to fewer than 200 active personnel, and every loss weakened their ability to coordinate a larger campaign. Still, the thought of infiltrating a devourer stronghold alone made her stomach tighten. What about extraction? She asked. You'll have to improvise, Admiral Torres said. We can't risk a rescue operation that might compromise our position. If you can retrieve the research data, signal us and we'll arrange a pickup at one of the outer rendezvous points. Louise nodded, accepting the weight of the mission. She'd always known that the Resistance's survival depended on taking calculated risks, but this felt different. The void cannon represented either their salvation or their doom, and she was the only one who could determine which. The maintenance shaft was exactly as cramped and uncomfortable as Louise had expected. She'd been crawling through the narrow tunnel for over an hour, her knees and elbows scraped raw despite the protection of her stealth suit. The geothermal system had been shut down since the invasion, leaving the passage cold and damp. Her heads-up display showed that she was approaching the Research Institute's sub-basement level. Louise paused to check her equipment: plasma cutter, data extraction device, emergency beacon, and enough rations for 3 days. If she couldn't complete the mission in that time, she probably wouldn't complete it at all. The tunnel ended at a maintenance hatch that, according to the schematics, opened into a storage room adjacent to the main laboratory complex. Louise used her scanner to check for devourer life signs on the other side. The readings came back negative, but she knew that didn't guarantee safety. The creatures had proven adept at masking their presence when necessary. Louise carefully opened the hatch and slipped into the storage room. The space was filled with scientific equipment that had been hastily abandoned when the evacuation order came. Broken glass crunched under her feet, and she could see where emergency lockdown procedures had sealed the main entrance. The laboratory complex beyond was a maze of interconnected rooms, each dedicated to different aspects of the Omega project. Louise moved carefully, using her scanner to map the facility and identify potential threats. The devourers had clearly been through the area, leaving their characteristic residue, a substance that seemed to absorb light and gave off an oily sheen. Dr. Reeves' office was located in the central hub, its door marked with Imperial security seals that had been broken open. Louise stepped inside, finding the room ransacked but not completely destroyed. The devourers had been looking for something specific, and they'd been methodical about it. Louise activated her data extraction device and began scanning the room's computer systems. Most of the files had been wiped, but she was able to recover fragments of research notes and technical specifications. What she found made her blood run cold. The void cannon wasn't just a weapon, it was a gateway. Dr. Reeves had been attempting to create a device that could open portals between dimensions, allowing the Empire to strike at enemy positions across vast distances. But the research notes contained warnings about the risks involved, descriptions of entities from beyond that might be attracted to the dimensional rifts. Louise stared at the implications. Had the Empire's research somehow alerted the Devourers to their existence? Were the creatures from another dimension entirely, drawn to this reality by humanity's attempts to manipulate space-time? A soft chittering sound from the corridor outside interrupted her thoughts. Louise quickly shut down her equipment and moved to the door, peering through the crack. 2 devourers were approaching, their forms shifting between solid and gaseous states as they moved. Louise pressed herself against the wall, hoping that her stealth suit would be enough to avoid detection. The creatures paused outside the office, their alien senses probing the area. Louise held her breath, knowing that any movement might give her away. After what felt like an eternity, the devourers continued down the corridor. Louise waited several more minutes before resuming her search, but the encounter had shaken her. If the creatures were patrolling the research facility, it meant they were still looking for something they hadn't found yet. Louise made her way deeper into the complex, following the signs toward the secured vault where the void cannon prototype was stored. The path led through a series of increasingly secure checkpoints, each one requiring higher levels of clearance. Louise's credentials were still valid, but she had to hope that the devourers hadn't learned enough about Imperial security to disable the systems. The vault door was massive, constructed from reinforced titanium and protected by both electronic locks and quantum encryption. Louise connected her data extraction device to the security panel, running a program that Commander Walsh had designed to bypass the safeguards. The process took nearly 20 minutes, during which Louise expected to be discovered at any moment. Finally, the doors cycled open with a soft hiss. Louise stepped into the vault, her helmet's lighting system illuminating the space within. The room was larger than she'd expected, with multiple workstations arranged around a central platform. And there, in the center of it all, was the void cannon. The device was smaller than Louise had imagined, roughly the size of a hovercar but with an intricate crystalline structure that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The cannon's barrel was unlike anything she'd seen before, a translucent tube that seemed to contain swirling patterns of energy. Louise approached the device cautiously, her scanner detecting massive amounts of exotic matter and dimensional distortions. Even inactive, the cannon was affecting the fabric of space-time around it. She could only imagine what it might do when powered up. The workstations around the cannon contained Dr. Reeves' most detailed research notes, including technical specifications and theoretical calculations. Louise began downloading everything she could find, her extraction device working to compress the vast amounts of data into portable format. As she worked, Louise noticed something disturbing about the research notes. Dr. Reeves had been in contact with an external source, someone or something that was providing him with information about dimensional physics. The communications were heavily encrypted, but Louise could make out references to the dark world and preparation for arrival. Louise's hands trembled as she realized the implications. The devourers hadn't just invaded from another dimension, they'd been invited. Someone within the Empire had been working with them, providing intelligence and sabotaging the defense systems from within. The data extraction was nearly complete when Louise heard a sound that made her blood freeze, the deep, resonant hum of a devourer command ship. The creatures had found her. Louise grabbed her equipment and ran for the vault entrance, but she was too late. The corridor outside was filled with devourers, their forms shifting and writhing as they surrounded the vault. Louise was trapped, with no way out and no chance of escape. But then she noticed something strange. The devourers weren't attacking, they were waiting. Louise realized that they wanted her to try to escape, to lead them to the other resistance members. She was being used as bait. Louise made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to run, she turned back to the void cannon and began powering it up. If she was going to die, she would take as many of the creatures with her as possible. The cannon's crystalline structure began to glow brighter, and Louise could feel the dimensional distortions increasing. She had no idea what the device would do when fired, but she was about to find out. The void cannon hummed to life with a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Louise felt the hair on her arms stand up as reality itself began to bend around the device. The devourers in the corridor stopped their advance, their chittering communication becoming frantic. Louise's fingers flew over the control panel, following the startup sequence she'd memorized from Dr. Reeves' notes. The cannon's targeting system came online, displaying a holographic interface that showed not just three-dimensional space, but the underlying structure of the dimensional barriers themselves. Through the vault's reinforced windows, Louise could see the devourers retreating, their forms becoming more agitated. Whatever the cannon was doing, it was affecting them in ways that conventional weapons couldn't. The charging cycle reached completion, and Louise found herself staring at a targeting display that showed something impossible. The cannon wasn't just detecting the devourers in the facility, it was showing their point of origin, a dark tear in space-time that existed somewhere beyond normal perception. Louise adjusted the targeting parameters, focusing on the dimensional rift that the creatures were using to access this reality. If she could close it, she might be able to cut off their reinforcements. But as she prepared to fire, she noticed something else in the display: human life signs, clustered around the rift. The implications hit her like a physical blow. There were people in the dark world, prisoners, or worse, collaborators. Louise hesitated, her finger hovering over the firing controls. Destroying the rift might also condemn innocent people to whatever fate awaited them in that other dimension. A new sound echoed through the facility, the deep, melodious tone of a devourer leader. Louise had heard that sound only once before, during the final battle for Celestia Prime. It was the creature that had personally led the assault on the Imperial Palace, the one that had torn through the Emperor's guard like they were made of paper. Louise looked up from the cannon's controls to see a figure approaching through the corridor. It was humanoid in shape but wrong in every detail, too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in impossible directions. The creature's face was a smooth, featureless surface that somehow conveyed intelligence and malevolence. "Captain Luis Vega," the creature spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. "We have been waiting for you." Louise kept her hand on the firing controls, but she couldn't resist asking, "How do you know my name?" The creature tilted its head in what might have been amusement. "We know many things about your species. Your desires, your fears, your willingness to sacrifice everything for the illusion of victory. What do you want?" "The same thing you want," the creature replied, stepping closer to the vault entrance. "To prevent the destruction of billions of lives. You see, Captain, the device you're threatening to use will not simply close the dimensional rift. It will collapse the barrier between our worlds entirely." Louise felt a chill run down her spine. "You're lying." "Am I? Examine the research data you've collected. Dr. Reeves discovered the truth shortly before the invasion began. The void cannon is not a weapon, it is a key. A key that will unlock the cage that has kept our world separate for millions of years." Louise's mind raced as she considered the creature's words. She thought about the fragments of communication she'd found in Dr. Reeves' files, the references to preparation for arrival. Had the doctor been trying to warn someone about the cannon's true purpose? "Even if that's true," Louise said, "why should I trust you? Your people have destroyed everything we built." The creature's smooth face somehow conveyed sadness. "We are not conquerors, Captain. We are refugees. Our world is dying, consumed by the very forces that your empire's research has awakened. We came here not to destroy, but to survive." Louise stared at the creature, trying to process what she was hearing. "The dark world is dying?" "Yes. And if the barriers between dimensions collapse, both our worlds will be consumed by the entity that destroyed our home. It is a force of pure entropy, a cosmic devourer that feeds on the energy of collapsed realities." Louise's hands shook as she began to understand the scope of the threat. "So the invasion was an attempt to prevent your scientists from opening the way for something far worse than us. But we failed. The research continued, and now the entity knows of your world's existence. It is already beginning to break through." Louise looked at the cannon's display again, seeing the swirling patterns of energy around the dimensional rift. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see the signs of something vast and hungry pressing against the barriers of reality. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Help us," the creature said simply. "Your people and ours must work together if we are to survive what is coming. The void cannon can be modified, turned into a weapon that might actually harm the entity. But it will require knowledge from both our species. Louise lowered her hand from the firing controls. How do I know you're telling the truth? The creature stepped into the vault, its form becoming more solid and defined. Because I am about to show you something that will change everything you believe about this war. The creature touched the cannon's control panel, and the holographic display expanded to show a view of the dark world. Louise gasped as she saw not a realm of monsters, but a dying civilization. Cities built from crystalline structures crumbled as reality itself began to unravel. Beings that looked like the devourers struggled to evacuate their people through dimensional portals, their actions driven by desperation rather than malice. This is what remains of our home, the creature explained. We are the last survivors of a species that once spanned multiple dimensions. The entity you see pressing against the barriers destroyed all the others. Louise watched in horror as the cosmic devourer consumed entire sections of the dark world, its form defying comprehension. It was less a creature than a force of nature, an incarnation of the universe's tendency toward entropy and decay. How many of your people are left? Louise asked. Perhaps 10,000. We brought them here hoping to find sanctuary, but your empire's weapons forced us to fight for survival. Many died in the conflict, deaths that could have been avoided if we had been able to communicate. Louise felt a wave of guilt wash over her. The resistance had been fighting to reclaim their empire, never realizing that their enemies were refugees fleeing from something even worse. What about the human life signs near the rift? Louise asked. Volunteers from your empire who learned the truth. Dr. Reeves was among them. They are working with our scientists to find a way to seal the dimensional barriers permanently. Louise stared at the display, trying to process the enormity of what she was seeing. And this entity, can it be stopped? Perhaps. But only if our species combine their knowledge and resources. The void cannon is powerful, but it must be rebuilt according to specifications that neither of our peoples could develop alone. Louise made a decision that would reshape the future of both worlds. I'll help you. But I need to contact my people first. They deserve to know the truth. The creature nodded, its form becoming more relaxed. We had hoped you would say that. There is much work to be done, and very little time in which to do it. Louise activated her emergency beacon, sending a coded message to the Resistance Command Center. The signal would bring General Blackwood and the others, but it would also mark the beginning of the most important negotiation in human history. As she waited for the response, Louise looked at the cannon's display one more time. The cosmic devourer was still there, pressing against the dimensional barriers with increasing force. Soon, it would break through, and both Earth and the dark world would face the same fate that had befallen countless other realities. But for the first time since the invasion began, Louise felt hope. The war was far from over, but at least now she knew who the real enemy was. General Blackwood arrived at the Research Institute 3 hours later, leading a heavily armed squad of resistance fighters. Louise watched from the vault as the soldiers took positions around the facility, their weapons trained on the devourers who had withdrawn to a respectful distance. Captain Vega. Blackwood's voice crackled through the comm system. Report your status. Louise looked at the devourer leader, who had identified itself as Nexus Prime. The creature had remained in the vault throughout the wait, using the time to show Louise more details about the cosmic threat they faced. General, I need you to stand down your weapons, Louise said. I'm coming out with a representative who has information critical to our survival. The silence that followed was deafening. Louise could imagine the confusion and anger among the resistance fighters, who had spent years fighting the creatures that had destroyed their civilization. Negative, Captain, Blackwood replied. You will exit the facility alone, and we will deal with the hostiles. Louise had expected this response. She activated the vault's external speakers, allowing her to address the resistance forces directly. General, with respect, if you attack these beings, you will be dooming both our species to extinction. She quickly outlined what she had learned about the true nature of the invasion and the cosmic threat that had driven the devourers to their world. The Resistance fighters listened in stunned silence as Louise described the dying civilization in the dark world and the entity that threatened to consume both realities. "You're asking us to trust the creatures that destroyed our empire," Commander Walsh said, his voice tight with emotion. "I'm asking you to trust the evidence," Louise replied. "The void cannon sensors don't lie. There's something out there that makes the devourers look like refugees fleeing from a fire." Nexus Prime stepped forward, its form shifting to a more humanoid configuration. "General Blackwood, I know that words cannot undo the damage that has been done. But I ask you to consider the possibility that we are not your enemies. We are fellow victims of a threat that neither of our peoples can face alone." Louise watched the Resistance commander's face through the vault's camera feed, seeing the internal struggle playing out in his expression. Years of war and loss warred with the logical implications of what they were being told. "Prove it," Blackwood said finally. "Show us this entity you claim to be fleeing from." Nexus Prime moved to the Void Cannon's control panel, adjusting the dimensional sensors to provide a clearer view of the cosmic devourer. The holographic display filled with an image that defied human comprehension, a mass of writhing darkness that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "This is the null," Nexus Prime explained. "It is the end state of entropy, the final destination of all realities. It has consumed 17-dimensional planes that we know of, and it grows stronger with each one." Louise pointed to the display data. "Look at the energy readings, General. This thing is operating on scales that make our most powerful weapons look like firecrackers." Admiral Torres, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "How do we know this isn't some kind of elaborate deception? A way to get us to lower our defenses? Because," Louise said, "if they wanted to destroy us, they've already won. The Devourers control most of the galaxy. They could have wiped out the Resistance any time they chose." Nexus Prime's form flickered with what Louise had learned was their equivalent of agreement. "Captain Vegas speaks truth. We have been limiting our actions to avoid unnecessary casualties. We hoped that eventually, your people would be willing to listen to reason." Louise felt a surge of anger at the casual admission. "You've been holding back? People died in this war." "Yes," Nexus Prime acknowledged. "And we mourn every death. But consider how many more would have died if we had used our full capabilities. The invasion was meant to be a demonstration of power, not a genocide." Louise wanted to argue, but she forced herself to focus on the larger picture. The cosmic devourer was still pressing against the dimensional barriers, and every moment spent in recrimination was a moment lost in preparing for the real threat. "What do you need from us?" General Blackwood asked, his voice resigned but determined. "First, we need to modify the void cannon," Louise said, consulting the data she had gathered. "According to Dr. Reeves' research, the device can be reconfigured to strengthen dimensional barriers instead of weakening them. But it will require resources and expertise from both our species." "And second?" Admiral Torres asked. Nexus Prime's form became more animated. "We need access to your planet's quantum communication network. The modifications to the cannon must be coordinated with similar devices being built in the dark world. Only by acting in perfect synchronization can we hope to reinforce the barriers sufficiently." Louise saw the tactical implications immediately. "You want us to give you access to our most secure communication systems." "We want to share access," Nexus Prime corrected. "Your people would have equal access to our networks. This must be a true partnership if it is to succeed." Louise looked at the Resistance leaders, seeing the same doubts and fears that she had felt when first confronted with the truth. But she also saw the growing realization that they had no choice. "How long do we have?" General Blackwood asked. Louise consulted the cannon sensors, tracking the cosmic devourer's progress against the dimensional barriers. "Based on the current rate of degradation, maybe 6 months. Less if it finds a way to accelerate the process. 6 months to rebuild our entire understanding of the universe," Commander Walsh muttered. "This is insane." "The alternative is extinction," Louise said simply. "For both our species." The Resistance leaders exchanged glances, conducting a silent conversation that Louise couldn't quite follow. Finally, General Blackwood nodded. "We'll need to brief the other cell leaders," he said. "This decision affects everyone in the Resistance. And we will need to convince our own people," Nexus Prime added. "Many of them still see humanity as a threat that must be contained." Louise felt a moment of optimism. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something that might actually work. "Where do we start?" "With the cannon," Nexus Prime said. "We must begin the modifications immediately. Every day we delay brings the null closer to breaking through." Louise looked at the void cannon, its crystalline structure pulsing with contained energy. The device that had been designed as a weapon of war would now become the cornerstone of an alliance between former enemies. "General," Louise said, "I volunteer to lead the technical team. I've studied the research data, and I understand the modifications that need to be made." "Granted," Blackwood replied. "But you'll be working with a mixed team of human and devourer scientists. Can you handle that?" Louise looked at Nexus Prime, seeing not a monster but a being trying to save its people from an unimaginable threat. "I think we can all handle it, sir. We don't have a choice." As the Resistance forces stood down and the Devourers approached the facility, Louise felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The fate of two worlds now rested on the success of the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. But as she watched humans and Devourers working together to unload scientific equipment, Louise allowed herself to hope that perhaps they could achieve the impossible. The cosmic devourer was still out there, pressing against the barriers between dimensions, but for the first time since the invasion began, they had a plan to fight back. 3 weeks into the joint project, Louise stood in the makeshift laboratory that had been constructed in the Research Institute's main hall. The space buzzed with activity as human and devourer scientists worked side by side, their different approaches to problem-solving creating a unique synergy. Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the Empire's former weapons specialists, looked up from her workstation with frustration evident in her expression. "The quantum harmonics are still unstable. Every time we try to synchronize with the Dark World devices, the resonance frequency shifts." Nexus Prime's colleague, a being that had chosen the designation Harmony, flickered between forms as it processed the data. "The dimensional barriers are not static. They respond to the presence of technology that can affect their structure." Louise studied the technical readouts, seeing the problem clearly. "We're dealing with a feedback loop. The more we try to strengthen the barriers, the more they resist our efforts." "Exactly," Dr. Vasquez said. "It's like trying to reinforce a building while it's collapsing. The structure keeps changing beneath us." Louise walked to the central display, where a real-time view of the cosmic devourer showed its continued assault on the dimensional barriers. The entity had grown larger since they'd begun their work, feeding on the energy released by the barrier fluctuations. "What if we're approaching this wrong?" Louise mused. "Instead of trying to strengthen the barriers directly, what if we create a new one? A quantum bridge that spans multiple dimensions?" Harmony's form stabilized into something resembling interest. "Explain." Louise activated the holographic projector, creating a three-dimensional model of the dimensional structure. "Look at the pattern of the null's attacks. It's not random, it's following the path of least resistance, exploiting weak points in the existing barriers." She highlighted several areas where the cosmic devourer's influence was strongest. "But if we create a new barrier structure, one that doesn't follow the natural dimensional boundaries, we might be able to redirect its energy." Dr. Vasquez frowned. "That would require a massive amount of power. More than all our modified cannons combined." "Unless," Louise said, her excitement growing, "we don't try to contain the null's energy. What if we channel it?" Harmony's form flickered rapidly, the devourer equivalent of excitement. "You propose to use the entity's own power against it?" "Exactly. Create a quantum bridge that acts like a funnel, directing the null's energy into a controlled loop. It would be trapped in a perpetual cycle, unable to break through into our reality." Louise began sketching modifications to the cannon design, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to coordinate not just with the Dark World devices, but with installations across multiple dimensional planes. Create a network of quantum bridges that reinforce each other. Dr. Vasquez pulled up the technical specifications, running preliminary calculations. The power requirements would be enormous. We need to tap into the energy cores of every major installation in both our worlds. And the margin for error would be zero, Louise added. If the synchronization fails, we could tear holes in space-time that would make the null's arrival look like a minor inconvenience. Harmony's form became more solid, taking on a configuration that Louise had learned indicated deep thought. There is precedent for such an approach. Before the null destroyed our homeworld, our ancestors created similar networks to protect their cities. But the scale you propose is the only thing that might work, Louise finished. We're not just protecting individual worlds anymore. We're trying to save the entire concept of reality as we know it. The implications of what they were proposing slowly sank in. Louise looked around the laboratory, seeing the mix of human and devourer scientists working together on what might be the most ambitious project in the history of either species. We'll need to contact every surviving installation, Louise said. Imperial Navy ships, colonial outposts, research stations. Everything with a significant power core. And we'll need to convince them to trust us, Dr. Vasquez added. A lot of people are still having trouble accepting that the devourers are our allies now. Louise nodded, remembering the resistance she'd faced when first proposing the alliance. General Blackwood is working on that. He's been sending encrypted messages to cell leaders across the galaxy, explaining the situation. What about the devourer installations? Louise asked Harmony. Nexus Prime has been in contact with our scattered fleets, Harmony replied. Many are skeptical about working with humanity. But the alternative is extinction for all of us. Louise brought up a galactic map, showing the locations of known installations from both species. We'll need to modify the quantum communication network to handle the increased data flow. And we'll need to do it without the null detecting what we're planning. The entity is intelligent, Harmony warned. It has learned from the civilizations it has consumed. It will recognize the threat we pose and attempt to stop us. Louise felt a chill at the thought of the cosmic devourer actively working against them. How long do we have before it breaks through? Dr. Vasquez consulted her calculations. At the current rate of barrier degradation, maybe 2 months. But if it realizes what we're trying to do and accelerates its attack, we could have as little as 3 weeks. Louise finished. Then we'd better get started. Louise activated the facility's communication system, sending a priority message to General Blackwood. Within minutes, the Resistance leader's image appeared on the main display. Captain, what's your status? We have a plan, General. But it's going to require cooperation from every surviving installation in the galaxy. And I mean everyone, Imperial Navy, Colonial Militia, corporate security forces, even the criminal cartels. Blackwood's expression grew serious. What kind of cooperation? Louise explained the quantum bridge concept, watching as the general's face shifted from skepticism to understanding to grim determination. You're talking about turning every power source in the galaxy into a weapon, Blackwood said. A defensive weapon, Louise corrected. One that uses the enemy's own power against it. And if it doesn't work? Louise looked at the display showing the cosmic devourer's relentless advance. Then we die fighting instead of running. But at least we'll have tried. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. I'll send the message. But you'd better be right about this, Captain. Because if you're wrong, we'll have doomed both our species. Louise nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that rested on her shoulders. I know, sir. But I think this is our only chance. As the communication ended, Louise turned back to her work. The quantum bridge was still just a theory, a collection of equations and energy calculations. But with the combined knowledge of 2 species and the desperate motivation of impending extinction, it might just be enough. The cosmic devourer was still out there, pressing against the barriers between dimensions. But now, finally, they had a plan to fight back.